Hello, everyone. How are you? Thanks so much for being here at SeriesFest, coming out for this really great event tonight. I think based on what you guys just saw, which, by the way, another round of applause for Gaslit. They did an incredible job on this. But based on what you just saw, I think you might have a pretty good idea of why critics have had a lot of really good things to say about this show. By the way, the third episode airs tomorrow night, so if you've not been watching just yet, get caught up. We'll maybe try to talk a little bit about it, but I don't want to spoil too much for you guys. That said, our guest tonight is the creator, showrunner, executive producer, and writer of all 8 episodes. Were you also catering? No? Okay. Please welcome Robbie Pickering. I know it's a water bottle, but I think it's vodka. So,
good.
Great.
I like it.
Well, by the way, I want to let all of you know we will be taking audience questions, so you guys can start thinking of those, and we will get to you a little bit later. While I'm with you on the audience, sorry, I'm not going to ignore you here, but quickly, show of hands.
Please ignore me.
Yeah. Show of hands, how many of you have listened to the Slow Burn podcast that this is based on? Not many. Okay. Well, then, that said, if you can please explain a little bit about what that podcast covers, because it is different from your show, but what was the grain of what you took from that you were like, this is my way in for a bigger, a different story that I want to tell?
Well, I grew up in a very small town in Texas, and my parents were very evangelical, like right-wing, and they were big fans of Nixon. I remember when Nixon's funeral was on TV, my mom was crying, and I asked her what's wrong, and she said, it was very melodramatic. She turned to me and she goes, "He was a great man. He was a good man. And they did this to him, the liberals." And I thought, ooh, I gotta find out about that guy. And so I looked into Nixon a lot, and I became obsessed with, all the movies and all the books and all that. And once you get into Nixon, one of my favorite movie as a kid was the Oliver Stone movie Nixon. But once you get into Nixon, you kind of figure out that, the story of Nixon and the story of that whole time period has been told over and over again, but from a very narrow perspective, right? And you get to see the people around Nixon, right? And so my mind immediately went to the people around Nixon. And I think it's kind of ground zero for a lot of the culture war battles we have today, and a lot of the complicity in underhanded deeds in government we have today, and
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and lack of trust in the government. So I got really into examining the culture of Nixon, and then I went into film, and I went to L.A. and New York, then L.A. and Rick Perlstein's book Nixonland, which none of you have read it. It's great. Nobody will read it, but it really, Rick Perlstein is a historian who really puts you there in the time period. And one of my problems with the Oliver Stone movies and all that was it was always like the heroes Woodward and Bernstein and the villain Richard Nixon, or in JFK. It's so big, and Rick Perlstein's books and a couple other books made it feel all really relatable and stupid and human to me. And I think the disservice that a lot of those Oliver Stone movies and stuff do, although I love them, is they make you feel like these were different people in a different time, a different dimension. But when you really look at the history, it's very relatable. It's like an episode of BBC's Office. It's like, oh my God, I've done something like that before. I've been an idiot like that before. But it's happening at the level of the federal government. And so, if these people were running a Chick-fil-A in Omaha, it would go under in a week. But they're running the federal government, so it's tragic consequences. So I pitched around town. I wanted to do a show about the people around Nixon. Really sexy Hollywood idea that nobody wanted to do. And then about 10 years later, the Slow Burn podcast came out. And this is my long, rambly answer. What Leon Neyfakh did, the guy who created that podcast, was in the first episode he centered Martha Mitchell. And I had always read about Martha Mitchell. She was played by Madeline Kahn in Nixon. I had always read about her, but in all the history, she had been sidelined. And he really showed in that episode how he centered her in the story in the same way the men had been centered before. And I was like, that's it. That's how to do it. And it just happened quickly after that. I took it. I actually just told my boss at the time, Sam Esmail, who created a show called Mr. Robot. I wrote on Mr. Robot, if anybody's seen it. I just came into the room one day and I was like, hey, I had given up on my dreams of a Nixon show, but he's a Watergate geek, so am I. And I was like, you gotta listen to this podcast. It's amazing.
And he loves podcasts.
He does love podcasts. And then the next day I got a call from my agents and they say, hey, do you like that Slow Burn podcast? And I said, yeah, I was just telling Sam about that the other day. And they said, oh, Universal and Sam bought it for you to do. So suddenly all my dreams of doing a Nixon show were realized, my 10-year-long dream of doing it. And from there I pitched a bunch of bad versions of it, but then finally landed on this one.
What a literal gift.
It was a huge gift. I mean, if you had come to a party at my house in LA in 2010, you'd be like, why does this guy have all these Nixon and McGovern posters everywhere? Like I've always
would have worried about you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, obviously glad that all worked out quite well for you. So we have the Martha Mitchell in, but what you've done so well here is also infusing this humor that it comes in unexpected places, but you also use it in ways to, I think, convey how these guys who were part of government they were morons at times, which is just wild to think at that level of government. So tell me about...
Is it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we would hope. They wouldn't be such morons. But was humor always part of the equation for you, or did that kind of just happen organically?
I don't really think of... People always ask a tonal question about this. I don't really think of humor. I just think of... Or tone. I just think of how I honestly see it, and you can't help but honestly see it as ridiculous. I mean, John Oliver used to call Trump-Russia scandal stupid Watergate, but I'd always watch that and be like, Watergate's stupid Watergate. Because here's a little secret. If you're doing shady shit in business or politics or journalism or whatever, and you need to hire people who are willing to do shady shit, they're not the best people. They're not the brightest. If you want to do shady shit and hire people at the top of their field, go into the mafia, but not politics. And so all these scandals are like this. I mean, there's a lot of Look, to me, I see a lot of comedy in the Putin administration. What Putin's done in Russia. I mean, you can't help but see, him speaking to all these cabinet members who are like incredibly scared of saying anything. It's farce that turns into tragedy. So this is like the pitch meeting where he presents the Operation Gemstone thing. Real. The line that is verbatim in that pitch meeting is quartz is a mineral. I studied nobody would believe a lot of this shit, right? So but I think it's still happening. And I think that's the danger of the Oliver Stone movies and kind of the boomer narratives of this time, is it makes you feel like it's like some unique point in history and, history doesn't repeat itself, it's rhymes and all that shit. Well, no, people are dumb throughout history and they always fall into these same traps. Every one of us in here has done something that goes against who they think they are because they feel valued by somebody in power, like John Mitchell, or because they're ambitious, like John Dean, or because like Martha, they like the spotlight. Martha was doing a lot of horrible things before this, and every one of us, I think what I hope this show shows is that complicity can come from the best of us, right, in any situation, and that heroism can come from the most flawed among us, right? Like Martha was, you'll see in the show, she starts speaking up about Watergate, not really because it's like this crusade she's going on. It's because she's jealous of Nixon having this hold over this guy she she loves and hates and like has this toxic relationship with, but it turns into heroism. And so I you know, that's all funny to me. You know, that's all funny, but it's funny in a way that I think I'm dumb and funny. Like when we're writing John Dean, we're just writing me. 10 years ago, maybe, no, I'm married with children now, but 10 years ago, you know, Lydia's Liddy, but every character, I'm writing my dad when I write John Mitchell, my mom and the church ladies I grew up with when I'm writing Martha, but every person in the writer's room, by the way, I wrote I have to say that I had a writer's room full of great writers that also wrote on the episodes and wrote episodes, yeah.
Well, thank you for giving them a bit
no
of a
problem.
too.
Yes, they're a great writer's room.
Yeah. Okay, so this is your first limited series, and you know, running the show also during a pandemic, which I know one of your cast members has been very much a part of.
Sean Penn.
Yes, but I digress. That's not what we're here to talk about. So which of your previous professional experiences do you think like prepared you most for this moment?
The crushing failures and embarrassing failures.
We learn those are the best learning opportunities.
Yeah, I was a hot shot. I made my first movie 10 years ago. I wrote and directed this movie for $150,000, and it won South by, and it got nominated for Independent Spirit Awards and all that. I was top of the world, but I was scared about my next thing, and just. When you're lucky in indie film, you feel like, oh my God, I better play this right, you know. So I did a horror comedy film, which I like, but when I got the script, I just my heart wasn't in it. It was never in it, but I was scared about what to do next, and it didn't turn out to be a good situation, and I kind of went very low at that point, and then. I was very creatively blocked. I was kind of coming to terms with the fact that I might have to get out of the industry, and then I just was about to give up. I would never give up, but I was as close as I've ever been.
Figuring out a plan B.
No.
Not even that.
That's too depressing because I've been fired from every job I've ever had. But yeah, I was pretty blocked and pretty bad for about a year or two there, and then. These filmmakers who had won South by a couple of years after me, or a year after me, Charles Rogers and S.V. Bliss, they had created this little show called Search Party, which I don't know if anybody's seen it. And I met with them and Michael Showalter, who just did The Dropout and Eyes of Tammy Faye, and they asked if I'd ever consider writing in a room, and I said, yeah, I just don't know what to do. And I had sworn to myself at that point, I don't care if I have to be a PA on something, as long as it's something I love and I want to work on and I believe in. It doesn't matter. And that got me into TV. And then I got to work on a string of great TV shows, Search Party and One Mississippi. And then Sam hired me for Mr. Robot and, heard I liked a podcast. And that's how it happened.
Yeah, and here we are. The cast in this, once you had that Martha idea, you were pitching it around town and got it worked out. Who was the first one on board?
Julia.
She was. Was she actually on board? That's what helped get it.
It was funny. Like I wrote the script and I wrote the kind of broad overview of the series, and so I wrote the pilot, and they were like, who's top on your list? And I was like, Julia Roberts, but we'll go to somebody else. And they were like, what? Let's send it to Julia.
And Sam had worked with her.
Sam had worked with her, but still you're like, yeah, okay, let's send it to Julia Roberts. Yeah, all right. Yeah, somebody else will do it. But within a week, she wanted to do it. She, like Reddit, really wanted to do it, but she really wanted to do it with Sean Penn, which to me was like, oh no, Sean Penn's gonna want to talk to me about politics, and I fucking love Sean Penn, but I was like, oh God, I'm gonna have to go talk to him about politics and all. So I had to have a dinner with him, and I also wanted to look cool, so I had this leather jacket that I should never wear again, because I just look like an old man, and I look like a divorced gym teacher or something. and I went and I roll up in my Prius, like I'm dressing like I'm riding a motorcycle or something. And but I had dinner with Sean, and it was great. And the thing is, I was so nervous about talking politics with him and stuff like that, but he was just interested in the marriage. And he was interested in like his own marriage and like exploring things about his marriage or marriages. And you know, one of the first stories he told me is, you know, John Mitchell smoked this pipe. He remembered John Mitchell from back in the day, and he smoked this pipe. And one of the things about his dad was his dad smoked a pipe too, Sean's dad. And when Sean's mom was gone, the dad could never fit the pipe stems together, figure out which went with what, because his wife was there or was not there. And I thought that was just like, wow, what a. So I put it in the show, and I just, after meeting with Sean, I was just blown away, and I loved him. And then he said he wanted to do all the makeup stuff, and I was like,
I was going to ask.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
So that was his
Jesus.
idea.
His idea. I was like, Sean, nobody knows who the fuck John Mitchell was. You know, sorry for cursing. I shouldn't curse. Nobody knows who the frig John Mitchell was, Sean. And he goes, I know. I watched him. And you don't say no to that. But what I was really pleased about was when Sean had a guy in mind, Kazu, who did The Darkest Hour and Bombshell and a lot of other great movies where the makeup is really seamless. And when I first saw Sean, what I really enjoyed was that his face, it was still there, like it was still Sean, and it was so seamless. And the most important thing to me, I had a rule in the writer's room, which was give Sean Penn funny lines. Give him funny lines, make him vulnerable, make him warm, because nobody wants to see, I'm gruff Sean Penn talking to you about. Everybody wants to see like sweet and lowdown Sean Penn, Carlito's way Sean Penn. So we did it, and I think the makeup like helps it or something. He feels like soft and crazy, and I just love the makeup. And now when I see Sean Penn, I'm like, oh, that's Sean Penn in a skinny suit.
Reverse psychology.
Yeah, he disappears into it, really.
Yeah. Julia, I mean, a million questions about her, but I mean, of course, we know the extent of, of her talents. But what perhaps were you not expecting in her performance as Martha that kind of surprised you on set?
The role goes to some incredibly raw, dark, uncomfortable places.
More beyond even episode 3, which, by the way, it's woof.
Way more. I encourage everyone in here to at least watch to episode 7, which is a lot to ask, but episode 7, I think it's like gonna. Julia goes to places I don't think she's ever gone, and I wasn't. When you kind of cast, I feel like she's a little casting against type. Like this role would usually go to like a Julianne Moore or like a Laura Dern or somebody like that, which was why casting Julia was exciting. But she had to embrace the discomfort of this woman and the discomfort of this marriage. And with Sean there, they go to places I don't think you've ever seen Julia go before, and she gets so raw and so it's incredible to watch. And it was one of the last things. Those scenes are some of the last that we filmed, because Martha, if you don't know her story, it goes to some really dark places. And I encourage you not to look up her story and watch it, but whatever, I look up that shit too. But she really embraced it and went there, and I think she's, I don't want to say this, when you watch it, I think that every marriage is complicated and every relationship is complicated that people have. And when you see an actor or two actors really exploring something so raw like this, you can't help but think, oh my God, they're exploring their own relationships and their own marriages. And this is real. And that didn't surprise me, but it pleasantly surprised me, because she could have easily not gone there and kind of coasted on the charm.
They are surrounded by just a phenomenal cast that you guys pulled together. Just a few of them: Dan Stevens, Shea Whigham, Betty Gilpin.
Shea Whigham, huh?
He's so good. Allison Tolman, Chris Messina, Brian Garrity, Patton Oswalt. I mean, it's really kind of an embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, but they were all like, I hate like the Valentine's Day effect, you know?
Oh, yeah.
You know, those mothers, Julie was in those shit.
Oops.
But I really don't like when there's no focus in a movie or show. A show gives you a little broader palette to paint with, but I think there's such a nice kind of symmetry to the show, even though there are all these great, because the great actors supporting them are all these brilliant character actors that, like McCord is played by Chris Bauer, the bodyguard who talks to her at the end. You just know his face, and he's from The Wire season 2 and a bunch of other, For All Mankind he's in right now, but he's perfectly cast, I think. And I think but the focus really is on Julia and Sean and Dan and Betty, who just, the interesting thing about Julia and Sean is that they had known each other literally since I think Julia was 18. And they have this deep love and you know, that knowledge of someone that you can only know when you've been close friends for them for so many years. And then with Dan and Betty, they didn't know each other at all, but now they're best friends. So the scene at dinner and things like that, you're really seeing these two people hit it off as people. And with Sean and Julia, you're seeing, you know, the closest relationship between two people that you can get. So it's a really nice symmetry between those marriages, and it helps draw the focus. And, you know, with Shea Whigham off to the side, kind of being, you know, the Rasputin of Watergate. By the way, the only character we had to bring down from who he really is.
That's saying a lot. Okay, that's saying a lot. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll turn it over to the audience. So if you guys might raise a hand, and I think we have a microphone. I just want to ask, like, in the midst of all of that, obviously very serious material, there are, like we mentioned, you know, there are kind of some moments of levity, but any, like, favorite moments, you know, from production, or even like some happy accidents, something that wasn't planned, but it happened and you guys ran with it and used it.
I don't want to spoil later episodes, so I'll just talk about this episode. So there are always happy accidents. There are scenes I wrote, like, the scene between Liddy and his son, which is my favorite scene. I wrote that because we couldn't. So that scene that part of it. It was supposed to be John Dean is on his date. Martha Mitchell's at the East Room seeing the singers and the protester, and then it was supposed to be Liddy and his wife go to eat with Howard Hunt and his wife. Howard Hunt, you'll meet in the next episode. He's like one of the main plotters of Watergate too. And we just didn't have enough. We couldn't. I had to cut costs, and so we couldn't do a new location and all that. And I thought, so I initially just cut the scene, and then I thought, you know, Liddy goes into John Mitchell the next day, and suddenly he's got this idea to make friends with him and all that. He's got to be convinced of that by someone, and he's got to realize that, and you got to see him at the depths. And I thought, okay, I got to do a location we already have. I've got to do it with somebody we already have later in the show. And I thought him and his son, and probably a month before filming, I wrote that one night. And then my friend Amelia, who's a novelist and my partner now, creative partner, we write together. She had this really great moment where she was like, let me have it for a second. And she just wrote the part with the good ships with ships thing. And it was like, oh my God, that's brilliant. And then Shay read it and he was like, oh buddy, that scene. Oh buddy, oh buddy, we're gonna go deep with that scene, buddy. And he goes to crazy places with those kids later. It's great. And by the way, when you see it later, all real dialogue from Liddy's book, stuff later. But I think that moment, and then another moment I wrote just like at the last minute was the moment where they're getting ready and zipping up the dress and stuff like that. I just thought you really have to see the love between these two people and the family here before it, no spoilers, so, might fall apart.
Might go a little bit south. All right, we are going to take some audience questions. We have one right here, blue shirt. I saw yours hand first. Go ahead.
So you said you had to cut a scene because you had budgetary restrictions, but because of that restriction, you made an excellent new scene that really informed the character. What were some other useful restrictions you found?
I had to cut characters. The original kind of overview of the show before a year, 2 years before we even start filming. You have to kind of see the scope of the show to know what I'm talking about, but there were a lot more characters involved, a lot more, and what we ended up doing in the writer's room was use characters we'd already kind of were side characters that we really wanted to explore instead of introducing new characters later on. In the second episode, you meet Frank Wills, who's the security guard who busted Watergate wide open and has been forgotten by history. He's a black man, and he was just the best thing he got was a 20-second silent cameo in All the President's Men, and his story's never been told. So, like in the sixth episode, rather than going to another story of a couple or something, we said, well, let's do the rest of Frank Will's story. So that was great, doing stuff like that, cutting characters. Cutting locations. I mean, there's a lot of like very boring practical stuff that I had to do that I knew from doing other shoots and stuff like that. On my first indie film, we had to make it for $150,000, and my producer said, "You've got to cut all night exteriors in your script. They all have to be day exteriors." And I just was such a little baby. I was just like, I don't ruin it, and I did it. Nobody gives a shit. Like, you just come up with ways to do it. But the important thing is when you make the way you have to, like I used to read in like Robert Rodriguez's book and stuff like that. Oh, the limitations will make your show better or your movie better or whatever. It will, as long as you have the core of what you're trying to say there and what you're exploring, and you know your characters. Because if you just make up new stuff, I mean, I don't know. It can be funny, it can be, intense in the moment, but ultimately, if it's not part of the story, it's going to stick out. So when there's something like Liddy's Kid, I know, G. Gordon Liddy, I know that fascists have a thriving family life oftentimes and are warm people, and G. Gordon Liddy with his family was a warm person. And I know later in the show that part of his journey is going to be to have to separate from his family and go through his own trial by fire. This is all very Teutonic Nazi language from the later episode, but I know that, so I know how I can do it better. I have to have that grounding to do that.
All right, thank you for that. Next question right here, black shirt, I think. Yep.
Great, thank you. Amazing show, so excited to see it. And my question is, the music in this was amazing.
I love it.
Yeah.
I
so
listened
what was
to
that
it.
collaboration like?
It's on
That's my question.
Spotify. I listened to it. I'm like, this is good music.
How does that collaboration come about? That's my question.
It was a collaboration with Matt Quayle. So like I said, one of my producers and my partner on it, producing partner on it, is Sam Esmail, who's a great creative partner with me and a great guy to bounce stuff off of. And I love the music from Mr. Robot. And, you know, I knew we had to do something different for this. But so I kind of went to Mac. Sam highly recommended Mac. And I went to him and I said, hey, send me a couple samples. This is kind of what I'm thinking. And he sent them back and they were great. And, you know, Mac is really easy to work with because he doesn't argue with you. He listens to you. And I'm not saying that because I don't like people arguing with me. I'm saying that because often what I'm saying to him is so stupid that it could easily be like, because I wanted to be more intense here and then light. You know, I don't know how to the language of music, you know. And he listens and he takes it in and he sees what I'm trying to say, and which is very similar to being a writer and getting notes from an exec, right? The best writers, the best creators who get notes from execs, you know, execs don't write, but you see how they're reacting to things and what they're trying to get at. And Mac is really good at that. And I think the great thing about the music is that I have been listening to it nonstop. I think it's really dramatic and dark and like I think it's very big, like it's almost like supernatural in a way, which I really like because we do think of this as kind of like a weird ghost story or something. So yeah, I like what he does, and he ties it all together. He ties all the, you know, I think I don't think about writing tonally different things, but I think a lot of times it's hard to marry the high drama with my comedic stuff and stuff like that. So he really knows how to tie it all together and make it feel one. That's a rambling answer.
Where do we have next?
This guy's had his hand up
there you go. Yes,
forever.
right here.
If you see my hands shaking, no, you don't. Just
Okay.
wanted to start with that. So you were talking about how when the actors are sort of doing darker material, you can kind of just like see them sort of exploring their own lives. And I was just wondering, like, from a writing perspective, how do you write darker material and just not get scared or like develop the courage to write it or just
Not get scared of what?
just of like writing darker material, especially since like you were also talking about how you were pitching this and how like
Right.
you kept on getting rejected and
Well, that's because it was boring in the beginning. Nobody wants to watch a show about Nixon.
but still like how do you sort of, you have to write darker material for your actors, so how do you do that and just not feel vulnerable?
You just be honest, and there's no way to not feel vulnerable. The best thing about writing shows and the best thing about a writer's room is you're just in there and you're listening to the most embarrassing things that people have gone through in their lives. That when he's pitching that the Operation Gemstone thing, that's just we're just writing, giving a pitch where you're not a TV pitch where you're like not sensing the audience to completely it thinks you're terrible. You know, we're writing like horror stories that we've been through, and then I remember writing the aftermath. So Liddy did really cry to John Dean. Did really like he got very upset, but like that shit about like what did you think? Don't worry, I can take it. You know. Like, I have done that before, and someone has been the terrified person sitting there with me who's like, oh, it was good. It was good. So I knew it, you know? So you have to be vulnerable. It's a requirement of the job. And I would say, you know, don't think about tone, just think about what's honest. Like, what have you honestly been through that sucks? You know, what have you honestly been through that's terrible and like embarrassing? Not even like big things, like little things. The real meat of those little everyday things where one of the things I love is like that feeling when you don't know where to put your hands. Like you're with a bunch of people who know each other, and you're like that's gold, you know? So think about those little things in life and how they can be bigger. So, but that's all vulnerability. I mean, admitting all that stuff is really hard. Like I said, when writing Dean, like I said to my friend Amelia, we were not getting Dean's voice in the second and third episode, and I called her up one day at night, and I was like, Amelia, we need to just write me. You know, and that was the key, because we're just making fun of me. You know, and I'm writing things that I really thought, and I mean, there are a lot of things in this that are just me, you know. So be vulnerable, and don't think about too dark or not dark. One thing I also learned from my first film was when I wrote the script, I was like, oh, nobody's gonna like this. This is so unbelievably dark. I mean, I was writing it about a bunch of dark stuff, my stepdad's death at the time and stuff like that. And people read it and were like, this is too goofy. Can you make this darker? So just don't think about it. Tone is not your job. That's the critic's job and all that, and the audience's job. Your job with tone after you make it is to sculpt it and like try to make it better. But like, you know, some people have a tone that everybody's gonna like, and some people have a tone that their honest tone is just like, not everybody's gonna love it, you know.
Thank you.
I think we'll take two more from the audience, and then we'll start to wrap up. Oh, standing up right here.
I would also say about that just one more thing about your thing. What execs don't like is when they feel somebody's selling them a version of themselves that's not honest. They can tell. In some cases they can't tell, but I'm not smart enough and I'm not a good enough liar to sell a version of myself that's not true. You know what? If they don't like me, if they don't like this thing I'm selling them, it's me. No harm, no foul. I'm not for everybody, you know? So, like, don't try to look at yourself from the outside and sell it that way. It's not a good idea.
Robbie, thank you so much for bringing this show. Literally one of the best things I've seen in so long.
Wow,
so,
thank you.
Honestly, blown away. I mean, the writer's room, Amelia, you guys just did an incredible job. My question is, you know, not having seen any of the other episodes, but just being familiar with the trailer, you know, the story, as you were describing around, you know, Julia's character seems to really be the heart and soul. So the question is, you know, writing for like a weekly release, how did you decide like where to end the pilot or where to end the first episode, you know, versus if it was like on a streamer, right?
I think it's very similar, because even on a streamer you're going to do it episodic.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, how did you decide like how much of her story you are getting into with a weekly schedule versus a binge? Is the question.
I don't think a weekly versus a binge really enters into it. It's like how much of her story do I want to get into in each episode is based on an overall kind of narrative arc of her character. So whenever I go into something like this, I always look first at the nucleus being a main character, and they have a conflict and a goal and a want. And Martha Mitchell's goal, there's dual. To me, you know, Dean is also the main character in this. Martha and him are, and in a TV show, you can kind of do that. In a movie, it's harder to have two true main characters with, you know, goals driving the whole thing. But with this, really, I started with Martha, and I started with, well, what does she want? And I read about Martha. This was back when Sam bought it for me, and I had to find a story. I read a lot more about Martha and found out that the kind of the crumbling of her marriage lasted the length of the Watergate scandal. And I knew from my previous, you know, obsession with this stuff that the other relationship that lasted the length of the Watergate scandal was John Dean and Mo Dean, and they both of those couples ended up in different places. I'm a big fan of a movie called Husbands and Wives by a man named Woody Allen, who's I think a molester. There are two couples in that movie, and I really admire the way the kind of narrative structure works, where they kind of crisscross. So I kind of based it on that. But Martha's want in the show is she wants to pry her husband away from Nixon. And there's going to be an answer at the end of the show, at the end of all this, about whether she pries her husband away from Nixon or not, and what happens to her, right? John Dean wants to rise up to the height of the Nixon administration, and he's using this thing to ingratiate himself with the president. And there's going to be an answer at the end of the show about whether he does that and what happens to him. And so you base the whole arc of the show on that, and then it's like, okay, there are 8 steps to get there. And the first step is the beginning of the episode. Well, you got to introduce Martha. You got to see what her want is. You got to see what John Dean's want is, how he's trying to do it. And then the tough thing about a pilot is you got to end it, but begin it, right? So it ends, you have this ending with Martha and John. They've made up, they're going to California. Hint, hint, something bad is going to happen in California. And you have John Dean and Mo Dean, they like each other and all that, but he doesn't resign, right? And at the end you see him stick his hand in the candle, which Liddy can do very well, but John Dean can't, foreshadowing. And you've ended the show, but you've put these people on the path that they're eventually going to, everything's going to come to a head. So you just have to divide it and really look at how you're, and that starts with coming up with the beginning of Martha's arc, the end of Martha's arc. The tough thing is the midpoint of Martha's arc, and then you can divide it from there.
All right, last question, right here, second row up in black, I think. Yeah. Do we have a mic?
Sorry, I lost the battery. Where are we going? There we go. Sorry.
Sorry. We can go longer. I don't mind. I don't know if there's another. Okay.
We could say it at the same time. I'm sure we have the same question. Yeah, hopefully. Hi. As the showrunner, creator, etc., I'm wondering what you prioritized when building this writer's room. It's such a specific style and it's such specific content that you wanted to share for a while. So I'm wondering how you went about staffing the people that you wanted to tell this story with.
We had a really great staffing process because it was the beginning of COVID. So when we were in a writer's room, and so we had our pick, but also we just had an embarrassment of great candidates, and really there were a lot of people we work with now, I work with now that got rejected for the room or whatever, that was just a matter of like their skills overlap and stuff like that. But generally you're looking for people with different skills that you don't have. I mean, I'm a big overall structure person. I have a very keen horse sense of like, that's my only function in the search party room was like, this should be the midpoint. And then it's like, okay, go. I have that skill. Amelia, who had been working with me on it, is she has a very kind of dumb brilliance. Like she looks at things really weird. So it was like filling in stuff. It was like we wanted somebody who was Martha's age, a female who's Martha's age. I'm kind of anti-ageist. I'm not reverse ageist. I want people who have failed and are older, rather than wonderkins, who I am jealous of and hate. But stuff like that, and then we needed a more experienced person, somebody who had been on for a long time, and that was Gina Fattore, who she wrote on Dawson's Creek. She created this show Dare Me. She's a brilliant writer, and then we just picked people who, it's like from their samples and stuff. It's like, well, first of all, they had to love the show. It couldn't be faked. We had to interview them, and they had to love it. And then, one important question we asked them, which will go to your thing, is the first question we asked all of them was, name a quality that you see in yourself, yourself that you see in one of the characters, and it has to be like a really bad, shameful, embarrassing quality. It cannot be a good quality. And if they didn't answer that question honestly and juicily, it was like, all right, well, you're not for this room. But yeah, you're just looking for different skills. One of my friends once told me, Robbie, sometimes the best person in the writer's room is the best person there because of the way they laugh. It's much different than writing on your own. It's like a group of people coming up with ideas. So, it's just different skills, different life experience, stuff like that. You don't want people to overlap.
All right, makes sense. All right, so I'm going to throw out the last question to you here. You mentioned that at the end of the series, we will get the answers to these big questions for Dean and for Martha, which sounds like we definitely are ending things in an 8-episode limited series, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have other ideas for potentially turning this into an anthology?
Yeah. We're talking about a season 2 right now. That's about a different story that is I can't say it right now, but equally probably more inflammatory and controversial and stuff like that, and weird and fun and tragic. So yeah, we're looking to turn it into an anthology, and then we're doing other political stuff elsewhere. So.
Very cool. Well, congratulations on that. Like I said, episode 3 airs tomorrow night. If you've not watched it,
yeah, you guys should watch
find
it.
someone who has Starz and catch up, because episode 3 he teases things go south in California.
Martha gets some tough medicine.
It certainly is. Yeah. Thanks so much to all of you for being here and for your
Thank
questions.
you, guys.
And join me
Thank you so
in thanking
much.
Robbie. Yeah.